In 2014, the new U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom, Matthew Barzoon, I believe is the correct pronunciation, became puzzled when he noticed a plaque on a wall near the U.S. Embassy. It read, "Major General Benedict Arnold, American patriot, resided here from 1796 until his death, June 14th, 1801. I heard someone laugh, so you understand his surprise. Being from the United States, he had never encountered anyone who would consider Benedict Arnold an American patriot. British, maybe. And for folks who don't remember the particular details, Benedict Arnold was a member of the Revolutionary Army and a hero of several battles, but decided to become a spy for the British and was caught planning to reveal General Washington's army's location at West Point. Well, the ambassador was puzzled enough by this that he had to get out of the car and look at the plaque more closely. He says, examination of the flags at the bottom of the plaque offer a clue that the intent was perhaps even more pointed. There was the Union Jack flag and a standard of colonial British America. Could it be a case of the bidders? Well, after Arnold's death, did his patrons still refuse to consider the United States a legitimate nation? So, as we do these days, he decided to write a blog post and ask anyone who might have information to tell him what was going on. His post was picked up by a local newspaper, and eventually he got the rest of the story. It turns out a private British citizen named Peter Arnold, whose family line split off from Benedict's 150 years before Benedict was born, was behind the sign. Peter felt Benedict Arnold had been misunderstood. A news article about the story quotes Peter Arnold as saying his heart was in America, and he felt that what he was doing was in the interest of America as a country and the people who lived there. And at the end of the day, he didn't think you should be divorced from England and the king. He said, so somebody loved us. History is about the stories we tell one another. It teaches us even more than facts. History teaches us important lessons about who we are and who we want to become. And it's almost always about perspective. From the British side of the aisle, Benedict Arnold was a loyalist. He was someone who wanted the states to remain loyal to the commitment they had made or been born to be a part of the United Kingdom. From that point of view, the founding fathers were traitors. It isn't just historical anecdotes like the ambassadors that remind us that there can be another side to the story. Fiction also contains such lessons for us. How many of you have recently seen The Wizard of Oz? Depends on how you define recently, right? I grew up in Kansas, so they showed it on TV every single year. And so pretty much everyone knows the story of the Wicked Witch of the West. She was the evil character. She was the one trying to defeat Dorothy and oppress all of the people around her. Do you remember why she hated Dorothy? What if she was angry with the wizard for a reason? Would that change things? Would it make it okay? How many of you have seen the musical Wicked? Even more that have seen Wizard of Oz recently. Or read the book on which it's based? There's a book, in case you didn't know, there's a book on which Wicked is based. So that story tells of a girl, Elphaba, who was shunned from birth for the ways she was different from everyone else, for her green skin. When she goes to school, she's paired with a roommate named Glinda, who eventually becomes the Good Witch of the North. Elphaba, pushed to the margins herself, develops a friendship with animals who can talk. Elphaba discovers that her hero, the wizard, is oppressing and harming the animals who are her friends. So she rebels and fights back. The book and the musical fit within the story we all know, But taken from a different perspective, we see a different possibility. That's what I love about stories. They teach us about possibilities. They give us, as human beings, the chance to examine ourselves from outside our lives. Are there other areas of our lives where the stories we've heard, often told by the winners, is missing so many parts and perspectives as to make a totally different story possible? What would it have meant if you had heard the second story first? If everything you understood about Oz was from the perspective of Elphaba, rather than Dorothy and Glenda and the wizard? It brings up the question of what stories are we missing in our lives? Whose stories are we missing? As you look around you at this congregation, at our state, at our society, at the world, whose stories are we missing? And what stories do we need to hear? And how do we begin? At last year's General Assembly, Brian Stevenson told the gathering of thousands of Unitarian Universalists that in order to hear new stories, we must do 4 things. Who was able to attend that General Assembly? Anyone? Oh, great. Then this will be new to you all. One of these is that we must step into discomfort. It's okay to acknowledge that there are some people, some stories, some perspectives we are more comfortable with than others. In fact, being ashamed of this or refusing to acknowledge it can be the very thing that holds us back. Our Universalist ancestors remind us that we need not fear hellfire for being human and having areas in which we need to grow. Our limits are not a threat to our inherent worth and dignity. Knowing where our discomfort is and accepting it as something we bring with us to new interactions and new stories, and then moving on through it to seek out and hear those stories anyway, is an important part of our faith. Brian Stevenson says we must also get proximate. Get close to the poor, the neglected, the abused. Are you in relationship with people who have different stories from you? Do you have relationships with people in poverty, people who are on the margins, people who have different experiences? I confess that I spend most of my time near those who are quite similar to me, only hearing the stories of those on the margins of society from a distance, through news articles, books, television shows. And as a few of you know, my own experience of getting proximate happened in May of this year. Along with 13 other people, I was arrested in Indianapolis at the Poor People's Campaign protest. Who knows about the Poor People's Campaign? Did Cindy mention it maybe?
It's in this UU World that just came.
It was in the UU World. Great. If you haven't read it, you can do that. We were on that day, that first Monday, protesting for women, children, and people with disabilities. I was one of 5 women who were arrested, and we were taken to a processing center downtown. The 5 of us were put in a holding cell with as many as 20 other women. The first thing you noticed about this holding cell was that it was dirty. And you really can't underestimate that word. There was dirt and trash everywhere. There were streaks of something that had dried on the walls. The vent at the top of the wall had so much dirt that it was somehow sticking out in a clump of about 3 inches. Yeah. People were crammed into this highly air-conditioned room with whatever they had been wearing on that hot day, often not nearly enough to stay warm. Women lay across the concrete benches, sleeping or sitting or chatting with one another, and the only source of water in the room was on top of the toilet, which was behind a low wall in the room. No one had access to soap, although when the person processing us medically offered a one-time squirt of her hand sanitizer, everyone got in line. Arrested around 5 p.m., we were there overnight The 5 of us often sat near each other on the dirty floor because there was no place left to sit on the benches. And as the other women, by the time the other women had begun to fall asleep, we had been given a sandwich and 2 cookies for dinner, which I couldn't eat because I'm allergic to wheat and dairy, and that's all that was. We were also given a small 1/2 cup paper container of apple juice and told to keep it with us because that was the only cup you were getting for the night. And it would be the only way to carry the drinking water from the top of the toilet back out into the rest of the room. There wasn't a clean place to keep these paper cups, and so I found myself guarding mine like it was my most precious item. If you've ever seen Lord of the Rings, you can imagine, like, my precious. It was a surprising feeling for me to have something where I was like, I must keep it. When we reached the point of exhaustion, we fell asleep near each other, some sleeping on their knees. I and another person slept on the floor using our shoes as pillows. These are such basic things. The human need to rest, to have water, to be clean in surroundings that feel safe. Even the ability to know the time was taken from us. There wasn't a clock or other access to that information. When I asked one of the officers, he refused to tell me. We had been arrested, but not convicted of anything, and yet the entire system at that point was designed to demoralize us and to humanize us in the eyes of the guards. Human beings do not easily move towards imprisoning or mistreating other human beings. So the structures of the building and the routines were designed to divorce the jail staff from their humanity and ours. The idea of risking arrest terrified me. Turning over control of my time and my choices to a justice system that I didn't trust was not something I wanted to do. But I felt called. The people we were standing on that line for, their needs were greater than my own fears. And I had told myself that risking arrest was an important part of my call as a UU and as a minister. What I didn't realize, though, was that the arrest itself would in some ways be the least important part of the experience. When we were being held with the other women, we explained why we were there, because everyone was explaining why they were there and what had happened to them that day. A group of 3 women we met in the holding cell began telling every new woman brought into the room, those women got arrested for poor people. They care about us. Nobody's ever done that. When the women found out I was a minister, 2 of them asked me to pray with them. They wanted to tell their stories and know that somebody heard their stories. By the time we were released the following morning, I realized my call in this action had not been about making a statement in the streets, as valuable as that can be. I'd been called to get proximate with those I rarely interact with on a day-to-day basis. This experience and a few others have given me a small, partial insight into the experiences of people incarcerated by our justice system. I was processed and allowed to go home after 18 hours. Some of those women were changed into different outfits and sent on to the jail. I'm not saying you have to go to jail to understand the lives of other people. But you can seek out stories, listen to experiences of those who are in the situation, and always understand there is more to the story than you can know. Watching TV shows and reading or listening to the stories about experiences of those in prison had not prepared me to feel that terrible desire for release, that anger and emotional pain that comes from being trapped in a filthy cage with no sense of time, no safe food to eat, no idea what was going to happen next. And my very brief experience in that environment leaves me with little understanding of the lives and stories of those women who were not released the next morning. It is in places like this and worse that we detain thousands of immigrants who have crossed the border illegally. Known as detainees, they are people who have entered the United States and are being held in what is known as civil detention. These people are not considered criminals and are only being held officially, legally, to ensure their appearance at immigration court. They are not supposed to be subjected to punishment or harsh treatment, which it's interesting the fact they have to say that because it implies that other people are allowed to be subjected to punishment and harsh treatment. Yet all over the country, including in Battle Creek at the Calhoun County Correctional Center here in Michigan, we are detaining immigrants, including asylum seekers, in prisons or prison-like conditions for months or years at a time. And as we know, many of them are children. One of these facilities is the Eloy Detention Center in Arizona. Eloy is one of the many for-profit facilities contracted by ICE to detain immigrants alongside convicted prisoners, only to guarantee they'll show up for their immigration hearings. One urban legend suggests the name Eloy comes from the Aramaic cry of Jesus on the cross that meant, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Detainees there are held by guards, awakened before dawn, locked in tiny cells. They are punished for rule breaking, up to and including solitary confinement. Gay detainees talk of being placed in solitary confinement for their protection. They provide toilets without any walls for privacy. The windows in the women's portion of the prison, let's be honest, have been blacked out, aside from a small strip of light at the top, because some of the women were exposing themselves to the men when they were in the yard. Female detainees who are simply being held to ensure they show up to their hearing are being deprived of the ability to look outside. Detainees cannot make phone calls. They cannot spend time in the library without supervision. They can check out one book a week. Complaints about poor medical care are prevalent. Eloy has faced immigrant hunger strikes and one of the highest number of suicides at detention centers around the country. These are not people simply being tracked to ensure they'll be present for a hearing. They're newcomers being told in no uncertain terms they are not people of inherent worth and dignity. Without getting proximate, without seeking to understand the stories and experiences of peoples whose lives do not mirror our own, we can fall into the trap of thinking we know what is going on. It becomes easy to see things in artificially stark, clear terms. A person who crosses the border has broken the law. Shouldn't people just come in legally? It seems like an easy question. And as a bit of a policy wonk and a rule follower, although my wife says my arrest proves my rebellious side may not be that far from the surface, I do understand the temptation to say, just do what you're supposed to. Without the stories, without learning more about the lives of those on the margins, I would be there still. Until we start to discover more about why people are crossing the border, until we discover what drives people to cross the border, to risk their lives, to risk their children, to risk arrest, to risk becoming a second-class citizen, we can't truly understand the situation. There are several ways to seek out these stories. We get proximate by stepping into our discomfort. One of the possibilities is through our Unitarian Universalist connections. For example, the Church of the Larger Fellowship has a pen pal program in which you can be matched with a person who is in prison and is UU. Or you can become involved in organizations like Michigan United. Start your practice of getting proximate today. Sit and connect with someone you don't typically hear from during our time of fellowship after the service. Talk to people. This is how you create new narratives, not based in fear and anger. Another task Brian Stevenson charges us with. Let the stories you learn teach you to question your own perspectives. Approach what you know with humility. Side with love as we approach the stories of others. And it gives us a chance to see when our current narratives are missing something. And as humans, we're always missing a part of the story. I don't have enough time here this morning, for instance, to fully share the stories of those citizens in Arizona, many from immigrant families who find themselves living in such poverty that the only option is working at the prison that dehumanizes new immigrants. The town of Eloy is majority Latino, and the average per capita income is $9,000. A correctional officer position at that prison can pay over $30,000 with good benefits. So when we get proximate and create new narratives not based in fear and anger, we can work together to tear down those systems that erode solidarity, respond to our call as Unitarian Universalists to promote justice, equity, and compassion in all human relations. This is how we do the remaining task on Stevenson's list: keep hope alive. Hope that we can find justice, hope that we can draw the circle wider, bringing in those whose stories may be different from our own. Hope is the undercurrent of each of the faith principles that bind our congregations to one another. It is hope that guides our respect for the interdependent web of existence. It is hope that keeps us working together toward our goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. My beloved spiritual companions, whose stories are we missing in this congregation, in our lives? In order to find out, we need to step into our discomfort, get proximate, change the narrative, and keep hope alive. May it be so. Blessed be.